Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. And tonight on the panel room, we're going to be taking a look at the devil in the details, or how do you get the details right? But before we get started, I'm going to be your host, Jim Nettles. Let's go around the room and see who has come in to join us for this one. So, Kendall, you're up first.
Hi. What do I say? It's really bad that I'm first. I was thinking about that when you said that. Hi, I'm Kindle Alexander and I write gay romance.
Stephanie?
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Burke. I also go by the name of Flash. My pronouns are she and her. And sometimes, what in the world is that? I'm a USA Today bestselling author of about roughly 100 novels, short stories, novellas, and articles. And I am here because I need more details to make sure that my stories stuff work out right. So I'm hoping to learn a bit more from my panelists and hopefully share some things that I've done in the past that works with me.
Paige?
Hi, I'm Paige Christie, and I write epic fantasy with extreme feminist overtones and a little bit of Old West. And I also do a little bit of contemporary fantasy as the mood strikes me.
John?
I'm John L. French, retired CSI from Baltimore City Police Department. Now full-time writer and editor. I write in a variety of genres, but because of my background, there always seems to be a crime lurking in the background.
Stuart?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm best known for the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, but I also write in a whole bunch of different genres, and now I'm a comic book writer too, as of earlier today. So officially, we signed contract today. So by the time this comes out, hopefully later next year, we'll have nice run of the Bluesmen. If you've read those short stories, there's going to be another season done as a comic book.
Excellent. Mr. Nash, sir?
Hi, I'm Bobby Nash. I also write in multiple genres. I do a lot of crime fiction, so I like to kill people a lot in my books. So yeah, that's me.
And Patrick?
I write in multiple genres, although one thing they mostly have in common is I use humor. I write fantasy, mystery. I write the Dear Cthulhu advice columns, and it's on the radio as well. And I'm probably best known for the Murphy's Law series.
So since we're here to talk about, getting the details right, a lot of this boils down to how do we go about doing the research? How do we find those little nuggets that either A, mean that we're on the right path for the story, and how do we go about trying to decide what is going to make it in, or what are the things that we just need to know when we're working with that kind of research? But so Kendall, we'll actually start with you on this one. When you're doing research, how do you know when you've kind of hit that little nugget that you need to make a note or keep in mind?
Well, I don't know about a nugget, but what I write with a writing partner, and we do this together. So we have each other to bounce things off of. But when our approach to anything on any book, we write about so many different things, but we just immerse ourselves in that profession. And we have always been able to find a U.S. Marshal that'll let us tag along. Or we wrote about HIV and we went into the health department for months and learned about that. But what we have found is we learn it all and then we become very vague as we're writing. And for some reason, when we learn all the details, but kind of skim them, people seem to really believe that you're a part of what you're writing about. And that's such a huge compliment. So the nugget would be, after you've learned it all, everything that you can learn, then that's where your nugget comes from, I think.
Stephanie?
Well, for me, it depends on what I'm writing. I was an intern at Hopkins in my youth before I decided I really didn't want to do medicine. So a lot of times I'll draw on the information that I was taught back then. And that's only for specific story plot lines and things. Sometimes I'll go off on a tangent and start writing about something I have never seen before or I've never experienced before. And if that's the case, then I will do just like Kindle does. I will find somebody who is in that career, who's in that field, and I'll bug them. I'll send them, I'll use the magic words, please help me, I'm a writer. And generally people are more willing to come forth with information and little things that you might not know. I've discovered also that as opposed to Googling things, when you talk to people face to face, they will drop little kernels of nuggets that you've never even envisioned or thought of, just from their personal experiences and things that have proven to be true. And I find it helpful to gather up all those things, even the most obscure thoughts. And I will keep those when I'm crafting my characters in the situations, because we have to know everything, but the reader does not need to know that we know everything. We have to know enough to make our characters sound credible. So if we can get them with that all knowing, all credible, this is their field, their career thing, that's amazing to us. And it shows an effective use of your characters. I've had people actually ask me, oh, you've gone to medical school before, haven't you? And it's like, yes, because it might have been something about taking 15 minutes on a break to sit down and tie sutures in your scrub pants. Most people don't know that a lot of doctors and interns do that. Those little small things that you can incorporate to make it more real and more believable, and a lot better than you can get from following what somebody else has done or from just Googling things straight.
How about you, Paige?
Well, for me, finding the right detail for a given situation starts with character. And so I build my characters before I do any world building, anything else, because I need to know who the characters are in order to know how they view the world and what they're going to pay attention to. And so then when I'm doing research, I think, okay, this character, out of all this stuff, all this data that I've gathered, would notice this, this, and this, as opposed to this character who would notice this, this, and this, because they're distinct people in my head. So for me, it's figuring out who they are that leads me to pick the nuggets out of the information that I'm researching.
John?
Okay, I do a lot of research depending on what I'm writing. I was once asked to do a Sherlock Holmes a story in which he teams with another character from that time period, and I decided to team him with A.J. Raffles, the amateur cracksman. My research was reading 2 volumes of Raffles stories so I could get the right voice and basically not necessarily how a burglar, a cracksman of the time would operate, but how did Raffles operate? And then that led me to finding period appropriate equipment, expressions, and things like that. Pat Thomas and I wrote a book called Frankenstein Monsters of the Abyss. My research was reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein about 3 or 4 times. And about the second time, just started making notes of things that happened so we could follow the storyline. So it's, lots of research, but again, as others have said, you might know it, but you might want to know it, but the reader doesn't necessarily want to know everything that you know. Nothing slows a story down like a massive data dump.
Mm-hmm.
Stuart?
Well, to begin with, the answer to this and all your questions tonight are, it depends. And that's always the case. What everybody said is all true, but also it depends. And one of the things we can talk about is that it depends on what the story needs at a specific moment. There are times when it's okay to kind of stop the story to give some of that extra detail, that extra information, if it's necessary to the reader understanding what's going to come later, for example. But, if you're in the throes of a big action moment, the climax of the story, this is not when you want to stop and start sharing your nuggets of wisdom that you've researched. So I think a big part of finding what you're going to take and is knowing when to take it and when to use it.
Bobby?
Yeah, there's been a lot of great information here. I definitely agree on if you can talk to people about, that do the job in real life, you learn little shorthands that add an air of reality to it, because doctors don't talk like you read it on Google. There's shorthands for what they need to do, or cops, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also something that we do as writers. If our characters believe it, if we can get our characters to believe it and understand it, we don't have to explain all the things, because you trust that character knows what they're doing because you've set them up that way. There's also little things that you can assume the audience knows. Like, I can say they get in a helicopter and fly away. I don't have to explain how a helicopter works. But that also works in science fiction too. If I tell you that the ship travels faster than light, I don't have to explain that, because people have seen that in so many TV and movies and books and whatever. It's kind of become just okay, we get that, Same with, there's a lot of those things that you can do because the audience already assumes they know it. And so sometimes you don't want to go in and just go, okay, we know, you think you know this, but you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong. If your audience can follow along, that helps too. So knowing kind of, whether you understand specifically how DNA sequencing or DNA profiling works, audiences have heard it on so many TV shows and news programs and whatnot that they all assume they know how DNA works. So you can shorthand things instead of putting out this long, like John said, you don't want to do this big info dump about, here's how this works. So you can so knowing when to use the information and when to shorthand it is a big factor for me.
Patrick?
I think everything everyone else said is good, and I use most of the information. I've been lucky enough to live in various parts of the country, so I tend to, when I have to pick someplace away from where I live now, I tend to pick someplace I've lived before, so the research, even if it may be a little dated, is a little bit easier. I think my wife says I'm a font of useless information. I think a lot of writers have that gift. And outside of writing, it may not be a useful skill, but with writing, it is, because I think we're always absorbing how somebody acts, different facts. And sometimes, you do the traditional research, like John said. John and I are in an upcoming Zorro anthology, and my research for that was quite fun. I watched Zorro movies and read Zorro comic books, and I read some of the original Zorro stories. So I've never had to just read comic books and watch movies as research before. So it was actually fun. So I think, talking to people, asking people questions, learning, and just, I think, like a lot of writers, I just like to learn stuff for the sake of learning. So that can come in handy. And there's also a really good trick, especially if you're doing first person story. If your character doesn't know what's going on, you don't have to explain it. It's just like, wow, whoop, whoop, and you can move on and then explain it later when the action allows.
Yeah. Bobby, you're also a member of Zorro's Writing League?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Bobby.
That's okay. But no, you're absolutely right there. It was fun. I mean, yeah. I sat and watched Zorro movies for each night for a week, going research.
Research.
It was research, yes.
So, I think we all kind of have over the years learned a lot of the tips about doing research. And one of the things I wanted to kind of do tonight was more about how do we use these things? How do we use them? Kind of going to your point, Stuart. One of the things we talk a lot about is how do I go find these nuggets? How do I go talk to somebody? How do I go pull these things in? But I want to talk a bit about how do we use them. So Stephanie, think about one of these times, much like the example you gave about I'm doing sutures in my scrubs. A lot of the time it's the little details that give that air of authenticity and credibility, which then extends people giving that belief and faith that you know what you're doing, what you're talking about, because it is the small details. What's something else that, in terms of your writing, when you've been doing it, when you've been developing stories, that is that one piece that is that devil in the details that makes the difference? Maybe it gives that air of credibility to a character. Maybe it's the thing that says this is the reality about how and why this situation could happen. If you got a good example of that you always love to go back to.
I honestly have to say one of the best examples of that is at a convention. I think I was at PhilCon. After the panel was over, it was a murder mystery panel. And after it was done, I actually had somebody walk over to me and go, "How did you know that?" And I was like, "What? That you're not supposed to dump bleach on blood. You're supposed to dump peroxide or lye." And I was like, "From hospital training." And then he was like, "Oh." And I was like, "What do you do?" He's like, "I work in a lab and we deal with a lot of bloodborne ailments and diseases." And I was like, "Oh, do tell." And we had a nice, wonderful conversation about lab protocols, how they get broken, and what you can do when something above board happens. You think you're going to have a panic about something. So we're sitting there and we had this wonderful conversation. I started writing a series for my daughter called The Mayfly Mysteries. And the first one, they're all hysterical. And there are a lot about society today. The first one is called The Mayfly Mysteries and the Case of the Dead Frat Boy. In the middle of writing this, I flashed back to what this lovely gentleman was telling me about how somebody screwed up in the lab and they had this blood spill in this lab protocol. And it was just something that was so weird for him. You know, he was basically this, everybody has that one person, you know, who's that doggone it, Bobby, just to say, sorry, Bobby, but yes, doggone it, Bobby, just a Bobby type person. And I put that in there just because, you know, in other situations, there always seems to be that one person who don't know what they're doing. When it came down to writing some of the details about the lab, after the book was published, I've actually had a few people who work in labs contact me to go, "Were you putting up cameras in my area?" Because that was so believable, because something like that just happened last week. And it wasn't a toxic spill that was going to kill anybody, but still it was just stupid. Does every lab have a stupid person like that? And it clicked on me that, yeah, maybe everybody has one of those people who don't know what they're doing in their job or their situation that pops in and does something that's horrendous that causes a big stink for everybody else. The fact that it worked in the lab and these two people worked in the lab was like, aha, I must be doing something good if I'm being able to pull some of these things that are believable, that other people who work in the same field can recognize or they can relate to what's going on. So I patted myself on the back thinking, you know, that's a really great nugget that I pulled. That's something that I'm going to have to try again. So I try to, once again, talk to these people, and it's just something that stands out in their stories that grabs me. In my mind, it's going to stand out to the reader too, who might not be familiar with that lab protocol. But for the person who is familiar with that protocol, it's going to be like, oh my God, I'm home. I want to dig into more to see what else is there. So I really love that example because it actually worked out very well for me.
And the technical term for that is "damn it, Bobby."
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to be nice. But, damn it, Bobby, do you have to correct me like that?
So Paige, what's your "damn it, Bobby"?
So I have to start laughing. Okay, well, you know, I'm one of those people who has, for better or worse, had an inordinate amount of jobs in their life. And yes, there's a "damn it, Bobby" in all of them. But what you start to find out as you go through the stages of your life is you do run into situations over and over and over again. And you do run into people responding to situations in similar ways over and over and over again. And so even if you're dealing with something that you only have one or two details for, the response to the characters to that situation can feel very universal. And it can add a depth and a resonance to anything you're writing. That means that your one nugget that you toss in can have a much greater emotional impact on your reader because I know that guy, or oh my God, I've been in that situation, or I felt that. And if you can convey the emotion of that situation through that one nugget, all of a sudden it becomes much, much more believable. The other thing I've been known to do is in certain scenes, in certain places, I will actually overwrite a scene and then back stuff out of it. You know, I did a story where I had the Jersey Devil in Tucson, and 20 years ago I lived in Tucson, so I wrote this whole big detailed scene about everything I remembered from Tucson, and then I just took most of it out because it wasn't relevant to the story, but I was able to leave the pieces that were going to make it feel real. So those two tricks are tricks I use. I don't do it with every scene because, oh my God, that's a lot of writing. But if you're trying to catch reality on something specific, especially in a short, it can be really useful.
All right, John, what's your damn it, Bobby moment?
I don't really have one like that, but I found that in doing research, I will find a nugget that I just have to put into the story. I'm working on a story now that's set in a quasi-medieval time, but I like to use real settings. And there's this medieval town, Andlau, out in the Alsace region of France. And it has an abbey that was founded because a bear told a particular saint, well, led a particular saint to where the abbey should be established. Well, I'm thinking I gotta at least mention a bear. And well, a bear is now part of the story. So, you know, it's finding a little detail that kind of leads, you know, kind of help. I had a story where somebody is casing a plate and he's dressed as a police officer, and he comments, nobody notices a police officer. You know, he has a perfectly good reason for being in the area. And later, the fact that nobody notices a police officer turned out to be an integral part of the ending of the story. So it's finding these little details, tucking them away, and sometimes using them, not realizing they're going to be a very important part of the story.
How about you, Stuart? I mean, especially with Max Porter, because you pull in a lot of local history and local pieces like that.
Well, okay. I was going to go a different direction, but that's fine.
No, you can go the direction you want to go.
No, that's fine. So yeah, Max Porter is basically the concept is that I take real history of North Carolina and specifically the Triad area and odd history, whatever I can find, and I mix it with witches, ghosts, curses, and magic. So there's a lot of real places and real events that happened, and from a research perspective, it's awesome because I can actually go to these places. And so one of the things I was going to talk about a different aspect about character, but since we're talking about, in this case, place, these nuggets, if you're listening to what everybody's saying, you start to realize that they can affect how a reader perceives a character, how a reader sees a location, or from a writing perspective, actual plot points. And so all my books, all my Max Porter books start with me just researching history and trying to find at least two odd pieces that go together in some weird way. And then from there, a plot will develop. So there's 15 of the books, Max Porter books out. Every single one of them has involved that kind of thing. And then it's a matter of, now I have this whole story and I have to place those nuggets throughout to almost like giving clues, because I don't want to just info dump, here's the full history of this. You want to tease it out as they're learning more and more about their area. Very much like you would do, you know, if you're writing anything, but like in epic fantasy, if you're writing epic fantasy, you don't want to spend 20 pages describing every aspect of the world at once. You just give them enough to keep going, and then they go to a new town that's all based on this one religion. Okay, now we can talk about that religion. Then you go to a town where it's all economically driven, and now we can talk about the economics of this fictitious world. And it's the same thing. It's just I have real information to work with. So, and if you spread it out, then your readers. I think Patrick was saying before that, we as writers just love to consume information and learn all this stuff. Well, readers do too. My readers love, at the end of every Max Porter book, I put an afterword where I tell them what's real and what I made up. And they love that. It's like, in some cases, they're like, one of my favorite parts is to find out at the end what's real, so I can go look it up and learn more about it. And that's not like just one person. I get that all the time. So I think as much as we try to be sparing and it's important, we also need to remember that our readers are just like us. We're readers too, and we all love to get all that information. So as long as it doesn't hindrance the story, you actually can probably put in more than we often allow ourselves to.
All right, Bobby, what about you? Do you have a damn it Paige moment?
No, I didn't. But even when you're researching, you can put a lot of your own personal, experiences into it. Like I have never worked in a lab, but I've worked with other people. We've all had a boss, or we've been a boss, or there's always somebody in the office that's the loudmouth. There's the know-it-all. There's the person that feels the need to tattle on those people are in every business. And if you can, you can do things with your characters to where you have character archetypes, you can then put them into those settings. That will do a lot of the work for you if you don't have that personal experience. Like I've never worked in a lab, so I can research what goes on in the lab and then have those characters add bits to it based on who they are to kind of help sell it a little bit, to make it feel more real, as opposed to just, the clinical of me trying to explain something that I've only read about. And so you can kind of use characters to add that sense of realism. And like Stuart was saying, to sparse out information. It's just like a murder mystery. If you're reading a murder mystery, we find out clues as the story goes. We don't get unless you're watching Columbo, you don't get all the clues up front. You find them as you go. So knowing where to put those and how often to sparse them out, becomes a big part of, especially in mysteries, of how you get that information to your reader. I know when I write mysteries, I like to play fair. I don't want to, if there's a clue that leads to solving the mystery, it better be in the book. I hate reading a book and you get to the end of it and the one vital clue was nowhere in any of the pages I just read. That, to me, that's cheating. I want my readers to either get there before me, they're smart, they figured it out, or to when those clues come up, to have that, aha, I remember that, or that kind of thing. So knowing when to sparse those out, I think, is very helpful. I don't know if that answered your question or not. So.
Well, we're coming back to talk about how you use them with characters in a few minutes. So Patrick, how about you?
For me, I think I have a lot of fun. I write with a lot of legends and mythology in Murphy's Lore, which is about a bar in Manhattan owned by a leprechaun who bought it with his pot of gold. And Hercules is the bouncer, Dionysus is god of wine. But I have deities from across all mythologies, and other people of legend come in, and a lot of the mythology is contradictory. One perfect example is in some legends, Helen of Troy's mother was Nemesis, and in other it's Leda with the swan. And I decided they could both be true, and it led to a whole huge subplot in the modern day. Just having fun with my Hell's Detective books, in demonology, and there's the chief of the head of the police in hell is Negral, and in ancient Sumerian mythology, Negral is a sun-plagued war god. And I got to thinking, why couldn't he be both? And I have a god in my universe. Gods lose power when they lose belief, and if they don't have mana, they fade away to oblivion. And so, through a series of events, this forgotten Sumerian god ends up chief of police in hell. So take both aspects and put them together. As far as the damn it Bobby moments, for me that tends to happen a lot when I read or watch other people's work and they didn't work in a lab and they have no idea how it works. I used to read for a couple magazines as an editor, and sometimes the stories I'm just like, no, that's not how that works, and I couldn't get through it. But it happens in major movies and New York Times bestsellers where they just don't get their facts right. Die Hard 2 is my favorite example to use. The whole movie could have been solved in 5 minutes without any violence, because in the beginning of the movie, he gets a call from his wife on an airplane to a beeper. The beeper couldn't work because he's in Washington, D.C. It's a California beeper. At that time, beepers only went a couple 100 miles, but he calls the plane, which you couldn't do then either. But then he has to figure out a way to take the tower to warn the planes to stop the terrorists. He has the phone number on his belt, the whole thing. All he has to do is find a payphone, call, say, this is my badge number, tell them to divert to Baltimore, love you. Oh, have them call the other planes. No shots need be fired. And the whole movie, it's just, and in the one, I think it was 4 with Samuel Jackson, he needs another way to communicate. It's shot out of his hand. At least that way you can buy it. But like I said, just when someone else doesn't get the details right, it annoys me. Or there's a series of books known as the Destroyer books. They made a movie about it way back when. In the beginning of the series, the main character becomes so finely tuned physically that MSG can kill him. So he has a McDonald's hamburger, they don't call it that, and he almost dies. And many, many books later, someone else is writing the books and he's eating a hamburger. And it's like the people writing it didn't read the other books and the editors don't care, because I guess it was a moneymaker. It sold 29 copies in the series, but still, you got to keep consistent. Although Nero Wolfe does it in such a way that you didn't, or Rex Stout did in such a way that you didn't care, because he did have many inconsistencies over the 50 years, including the fact that, like cartoon characters, Archie and Nero never got older.
I was going to say the Destroyer, that's Remo Williams is the
Remo
character.
Williams.
And that and like the Mac Bolins, there are literally 200-300 books in those series. So and they started so long ago that back then they didn't really have do story Bibles like they do now. So I suspect whoever, I don't remember who took over once the original guys stopped, but whoever took over probably was whoever they weren't going to sit there and read 140 books to get the full details. They're like, I know, I've seen the movie, give me who he is and we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's like
in that series for 50 books, he can only eat duck and rice.
Right.
Only eat duck and rice for 50 books. Book 70, he's chowing down on a hamburger. So,
but
I have 150 something books.
Yeah,
it's Arthur Conan Doyle and Watson's Wolf.
Yeah,
and his wife.
So or even Zorro, because we were talking about Zorro. Even reading the first few Zorro stories, the same author contradicts himself multiple times.
Yeah, in the Curse of Capistrano, at the end, Don Diego reveals he's Zorro. In the second book, everybody has forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Then later his name changes.
Yeah, but I think Peter David wrote a Zorro novel, which explains that I think Don Diego convinces everyone that in order to protect Zorro, he pretended to be, which was a good one.
So how about you, Kendall? What's your, and you're on mute.
Are you there?
Now we are.
Oh, okay. My daughter came home. I was trying to block out her noise. what I have to say is that every one of you is fascinating. Listening to you talk about your process and what you go through, like, I don't want to lose any of y'all after we leave this thing, because y'all are just so, you just have it. I tend to identify more with what Paige said because of what my genre is. I've got layers of details that I've got to keep in mind. And ultimately, and it's hard to be gay in the United States. And if you are any person with age, you have been through a lot in order to be who you are. And that has to be represented in your stories as well as the details. And I have found that, Paige, I think it was you, that when I go out into the world and come back home, I find that I write and write and write and write and write and write and write. And I write long books. They're generally about 140,000 words, but I have found that I will delete as many as 40,000 words once it's finished, because I don't want the information dump, and I want the consistency of that emotional gay experience in the United States or around the world, I guess, to always have hints inside those details that I'm writing. So for me, I truly, Paige, I don't see you up there. I like your cowboy hat, but I'm not afraid to delete to make sure that I'm not, in order to keep it as vague as possible. My criticisms have come when I've written too much. Like I wrote about an amputee that I was a part of, and the reviews came in and they were like, I don't know about amputees, but I can't imagine that's how it happens. And that was on my first book, and it taught me so much to go to where you guys are now, that there's a sweet spot of putting in information through the whole series. You might get something in the first book that you use in the 10th book. And I have done that too. My deleted scenes have come up in other books, but I do struggle, and I want to read you guys because I do struggle with finding out about that hamburger later. Like authors that do that, it's such a turn off to me, or a misspelled name, or they're in a different city, or or he was wearing pants and now he's not, and then he is again, or whatever. That's kind of in my world, because we have a little sexy world in my world. But that's my same thing too.
Well, I'm curious, because something you just brought up. I'm curious for the group. How do you guys keep track of that as a writer of your own series? I know when I'm writing, at the bottom of my manuscript, I have all the characters that are appearing. My main characters, they usually have a big block of text, but underneath it, it's characters that are appearing in this story. And as I put things that I feel are important that I may have to touch on later, I add that to it. And when I'm done, I copy that into the character Bible sheet, and then I can use it again. Do you guys do something different? I'm curious how you guys keep track of things like the guy can't eat hamburgers, or this character hates tomatoes.
Well, I try not to have too many of those things per character, for starters, because the more of those individual specific details, I suppose we're going to come around to character in a bit, but the more you have those per character, the easier it is to lose track. And if I didn't have a Timmy on my lap, I would grab my desk copy of my first book. And what I do is, as I'm starting the next novel in the series, not only do I have my list of, all the terms I've made up and how they're spelled and what they mean, because I write epic fantasy, and who all my characters are, even right down to who was the name of the innkeeper that you mentioned once in book 1, because you may need him again. But I have flags throughout that book. I have those little sticky note flags. And it's like, I have 3 novels. I just turned in my 4th and final book in the series. I have 3 novels full of flags in my writing space. And these are all the details from the first 3 books that I have to make sure are mentioned in book 4. And I as I literally go through and I double check them over and over and over again, which is why it takes me 6 drafts to get a book written. But that's one way I do it.
Here's
like-
an answer.
I'm almost.
Bobby. Go ahead, John.
Okay, I'm almost, when I'm writing like a book in a series, or even just another story in the series, I'm constantly going back to the previous stories, the previous books, make sure that I get things right, because there are times I just don't remember. I know who he's supposed to be. I just can't remember what his name was, or the proper spelling of his name. So I don't really keep notes or anything like that, but with everything on the computer, it's easy to go back and like, okay, this guy's name was what? Okay. Type of thing. So I'm constantly which author doesn't like to read their own stories, reread their own stories?
Or remember what chapter the guy was in.
Yeah.
I
I don't generally keep notes. I should. And I mean, I have the notes that I took when I was making the book, and then I move on. But one technique I use, and for my long running series, I stole from Joss Whedon, which was that if, with Buffy at the end of every season or every so many seasons, there's a complete apocalypse and they reset. And so, as with real life, I don't like Max and his wife and his found family. They're not in the same office house at all that they start off in. By the time, I think they're on their 3rd or 4th house now. Their fortunes have gone up and down over the course of time. So I'm able to really just kind of wipe the slate clean and be like, I don't care where I put the bathroom in that house, because I burned that house to the ground so I could start over. So after, every three books or so, I mean, because otherwise you're right. I mean, I've written 15 of them and I have no desire to read book 1 ever again. I read it enough when I wrote it. And I wrote it 10 years ago or something. So my writing 10 years ago is terrible compared to what I'm doing now, I hope, if I'm doing my job right. So I don't want to read it again. So it's easier at that point to, as much as possible, wipe the slate clean. Although I do agree with Paige too, is I try not to have so many characteristic quirks that you're juggling them then, and it becomes a problem.
I write with the app of Scrivener. It's a wonderful application. On the side, you can have a listing of all your characters. Within those characters, you have all their character traits, their background stories, and you can set it up to do one book, or you can set it up to do a series. So that is a far cry from when I used to create a Bible by hand and transfer everything over to a document that's on the side that I had to shift through. With Scrivener, you just go down the side, pick, okay, his eyes are blue. All right, I made them green. Let me change that. Or if he has a certain personality quirk, you can put that in there and you can change them out. I actually kill characters. I leave their information, the character sheet up, but I just they're dead now. So if I have to go back into a past for somebody has a memory or a flashback or something, I can always have that information there handy. But I like using computer technology to make it easier for me to keep track of what I'm doing. Because before then, with some of the names and things that I've created, I don't even know how to pronounce half of them. But, after writing them 50 million times, I better be good at spelling them. So those little apps like that, they make it a whole lot easier.
As you've got the entire tab down the side that says deceased, missing in action.
Hey,
You are
Captivated.
dead to me.
Stephanie, I'm with you.
And don't you love it when a
Scrivener's
fan comes
color
up and
coding.
says, "Oh, I love this character so-and-so," and you're like, "Oh, that's how you pronounce it."
Yeah, I've done that. They're like, "Oh, how do you pronounce that?" I pronounce it so-and-so. Is that how you pronounce it? And it works for me. Okay.
So actually, I do want to talk about that, because I mean, often the devil in the details, where they become most important, is with our characters. It's the quirks, it's the little things that make them feel real. It's the things that make them feel whole. It's the things that show us their strengths, their weaknesses. So as you think about getting these details and hitting this, whether it's as simple as eye color, because sometimes they're blue, sometimes they're green, sometimes they're hazel, sometimes they're just a shifter, it's fine. But yeah, if you're looking at the details that are creating that character for you, how do you go about making sure you're doing the things that give you that rounded person? So Paige, what is
This
it
is
for
my
you?
favorite thing. This is my favorite thing because this is where I dwell. I'm such a character-driven writer and reader. Um, I am not the author who is going to tell you that she's got long blonde hair and blue eyes and her cheekbones are like this and her nose is like that and she likes to wear these. I'm not that author. I'm not that author. I'm going to be the author that tells you his defining characteristics physically is that he's tall. Hers is that she has brown hair. His is that his hair is long. You're going to get one, maybe two physical details from me. You're never going to get a full description. And the rest you're going to get through their actions and their thought patterns. And so if I've got a character who's tall and he's tall, he's an alcoholic, recovered alcoholic. She is a shifter with brown hair and she's salty as hell about life. One or two or three details that distinguish that character, and the rest for me is defined through their actions and how they interact with other characters. And for me, who they are inside is way more important than what they look like physically. So for me, the details have to do with their emotional responses and actions to situations. And it needs to be consistent to their personality or to the character arc that I'm sending them on. They don't have to stay the same, but they have to be consistent in why the changes happen in their journey. And for me, character is about emotion and it's about response. And so when I think details, I think in that regard, that emotional regard, that intellectual regard, more than a physical thing, except for one or two things that maybe another character would notice about them if they're in a situation together. I keep coming back to height because I have one character who's significantly taller than the other characters in the series that I write. And it's a distinguishing thing that people are constantly noticing about him when he's not the point of view character and someone else is seeing him. So, and that again is a signal to the author that this person they're going to interact with, having seen him from his own point of view in other situations, you have an expectation of how that interaction is going to go, because that's the signal. This is this person in the situation. Person A is in the situation with person B. I've met them both separately. And there can be a resonance, again, that word, in how they interact based on those physical signals when they encounter each other. But again, for me, it's all emotion, if that helps at all.
So what about you, John? What about those devil in the details for the characters themselves?
Actually, I find that I really can't plan a character. I can create maybe one thing about her or about him, and they usually tell me themselves as in the writing what their quirks and what their habits are. If I try to plan it, it doesn't work out. One thing I didn't do when I first started writing, if somebody, even if it's only a walk on for information, I give them a name. I name the character first name, last name, and somehow by giving them a name, I establish, first of all, naming them makes them real. They're not just doorman. They're Joe Babylon. And so there's got to be a reason why they call him Joe Babylon, even if the main character drops one or two words about this character, about this guy, it helps bring the whole story, it helps make the whole story real. And sometimes I have a book coming out called The Wages of Sin, and that's spelled S-Y-N. And he went into this house of pleasure, shall we say, to get information about, for his client. And the woman who ran it, was new. And I named her, and next thing I know, she takes over the whole scene, and she is in every other story of the book simply because I named her. And by naming her, I got a really important character that essentially changed the main character's life. So, I find that, you name something, it's yours, but if you name something, it helps you define who it is.
Well, and often the name you give somebody has a lot of the details in it itself. What about you, Stuart?
Well, I have 2 points I want to make, because one was what I was originally going to say last time, but Paige.
Yeah, but if nothing else, if I can't mess with you.
I do the same thing as Paige, which is that I give a bare minimum of details just to keep things going, and more of the character comes out through his or her actions, thoughts, behaviors. However, one, to kind of expound on Paige's thing, the way I approach physical details and quirks and things like that is that if you're going to include them, they should essentially serve one of two purposes, or both. One is that they should identify the character. So Paige was talking about her really tall character, or maybe they have a scar, and that's just a way, a shorthand, because if I know then 200 pages from now, if I mention, oh, it's the guy with the scar, you're going to remember that character, even if they haven't been on for 200 pages, if I made a big deal out of that scar earlier. But if you just throw out that they have blue eyes, and it's like, authors who forget what color eyes their characters have is because that detail doesn't really matter. So if you're using it as an identifier, then it matters, and you and your reader will remember. The other reason to mention anything like the color of the eyes is if it's important to the actual story. The fact that the character had blue eyes meant that only that they could absorb the blue rays of the blue sun on the planet Zozo, and or whatever it is. That then it's important, but otherwise, just don't worry about it, because it doesn't matter to you, and your reader is going to forget it, because again, we are all readers ourselves, and half the time the character I create in my head is very different from what the writer has tried to make me see. And if they've done their job poorly, that's when, like, 20 pages in, they're like, oh, and he's left-handed, and I'm like, well, he's been right-handed for 20 pages, so I'm sorry, but he's going to be right-handed. I can't change that now. So that's that aspect of it. The other thing, though, real quick, was my Nathan K books, which are action, thriller, fantasy, kind of, I always describe him as John Wick with immortality. And so his description often comes through these nuggets of knowledge he has of guns, because he knows guns. And that's something I've had to continually research and learn more about. But just being able to name an odd gun and know the proper number of rounds it has in it, which I pick up from Guns and Ammo magazine online, suddenly I'm a gun expert as far as half my readers are concerned. So, and more importantly, Nathan is a gun expert, not me. The character's a gun expert. And so I get so much more character out of him because of these assumptions the readers put into place based on him just being able to say, oh, that's a such and such gun, or oh, that has that has a sight, but that one doesn't, or whatever the term you want to use, terminology. So there you go.
Bobby, how about you?
Yeah. I do a very similar thing with my characters. Usually I just got like height, so when characters are next to each other, and how they dress a lot often. If this character, like if I'm writing my Sheriff Myers character, he's not a spit and polished, like, perfectly starched uniform. He's in regular clothes, just wearing the sheriff's jacket, because he's a small town sheriff where, they're not standing on ceremony as much, or things of that nature. I'll turn it here and see it, like with the snow book. So you can see the poster there. The only information that I gave to the artist when he was designing the poster was his height and a description that was from the book about his hair. That Snow's hair, no matter what he does to it, looks like he just rolled out of bed. He can comb it, it doesn't matter. And so that becomes a standard thing about him, that he stands out because he's got this messy, can't keep it combed hair. But I don't think I've ever mentioned his eye color or things like that. So there's a lot of that, because I know when I read books, I tend to picture the characters a certain way. Even then later, if they describe something, it's like, well, that's different than what, I imagined, I'll give you a perfect example. This was not mine, but the Harry Bosch novels that Michael Connelly writes. For years reading those, Harry Bosch looked like Clint Eastwood to me. He's not described like that, but in my head, he's Clint Eastwood until they put out a TV show. And now in my head, he looks like the guy on the TV show. But so those are things that your reader's going to add those things. And so you don't want to overload it. Same thing with the murder and the action and gore and violence. I don't have to describe a grisly murder in detail, because if I leave parts of it vague, the reader will fill in those gaps with their imagination and make it even more violent, more bloody, more gory than I could have wrote it. So those things kind of work. You can kind of get your characters going, how they act, how they understand it. And for me, a lot of times it's personality. I start with the characters. You get to know, kind of like what Paige was saying earlier, you start with the characters. The characters will tell you what they will and won't do. And you will know, oh, this doesn't feel right when you're writing it because it seems out of character. So something you've set up has told you that character would not do things this way. And so sometimes it's damn inconvenient to my ease of writing that they won't do what I want them to, but almost always the solution to make them stay in character makes the story better, because their character informs that plot. And so coming up with the character and how they act and how they respond to things that, things they might say over and over again, or different things they do on a regular basis that that defines that character, as opposed to, hey, 6'2" with blue eyes and brown hair, and that kind of, how they act is more in keeping.
So Patrick, how about you? How do you get those little character details?
I would say what a lot of people have said, I would agree with. I tend to do more blanket details. Although I will say many of my works are first person, so you get more descriptions about everyone but the narrator, because they're not going to stop in front of the mirror and say, "Oh, my perky bosom and my butt is sagging," and that's done. That's why I'm pointing that out, because the female character will stop in front of the mirror and admire her cleavage. Because, do that.
I'm admiring yours right now.
I use the makeup to enhance it today. It's nice for you to notice. My abs too, but that's below the camera. But I think with having that happen in fight scenes, a lot of times the character doesn't know the names of the people they're fighting, but if they're fighting 2 or 3 people, you need to just, differentiate in the fight scene. So we have somebody who's short, someone who's tall, someone who has a scar, someone who has a beard, someone who has long hair, someone who has shaved head, someone who has a goatee. You come up with some way to describe them as the fight scene is happening. So the narrator can give you the details or the play-by-play, so you can differentiate between the characters. So those characters I tend not to name. The ones that I tend to name do tend to stay around a little bit longer. Although sometimes I writing a new series called Bikini Jones, about a woman who's cursed to forever wear a bikini. It's not her fault. She puts on clothes, they disappear. She takes off the bikini, a new one disappears. And it's very fun, funny, sci-fi, fantasy. Every genre you can conceive of is thrown in there, along with the kitchen sink. And I keep throwing in these throwaway characters who are going to keep coming back because they're just too fun. They're not short, they're not tall, they're not have a goatee. 3 throwaway characters in the first book open a restaurant in the second book. which she becomes an investor in, and they're gangsters who are now reformed. And it's just sometimes the details you give the characters make them so beloved by the author that the author wants to bring them back. And I'm like Mel Brooks in a way. Mel Brooks says he makes films that he wants to see. I write books that I would like to read. And I hope that other people are going to have a similar taste to me. So if I write something and bring something back, if I like it, I'm hoping my readers will like it. And so far it's worked out okay, going with that. But I think that's, I had to do a work for hire once that never saw the light of day, though I did get paid. Hated it. It was like, you know, dragging and pulling teeth because it wasn't something I wanted to do. But I had agreed to it. And I figure if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have fun with it. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to put the details in that they need. And also, as you write a series, like people have said, you get more details about the character as it goes on. Murphy's Law in that series, I have well over 100 characters to keep track of. I make lists and do all sorts of stuff. There are 20 plus books in the series. Some of the characters have gotten their own spin-off. So that's one with the main characters, at least they're indelled in my brain. It's the supporting cast that I have to go back and use the find function to get the details when they show back up again. Because yeah, somebody from book 3 can show up again in book 9. And what were the details? But if I'm naming the eye color, it's because it's something unusual. Like one of my characters has violet eyes, or, you know, they're red and they're glowing in the dark. That's unusual. Seems like an important detail. You know, just that they're, you know, they're brown, not as important. Although my police officer characters tend to be a little bit more descriptive, but they're also casing out the scene as you would expect an investigator, you know, not quite as bad as Joe Friday, but they're still giving a little bit more details than somebody who's not in that line of work.
So Kendall, you know, how about you? Because I mean, and again, with romance and everything else, it is all about the character. It is definitively all about the relationships. So for you and, you know, the writing you're doing, how do those little details work for you? Is it any different from, say, the mysteries, the investigations, the Cthulhu on the floor? And you're on mute.
No way. I
Now
hit
you
the
are.
button. I hit the button. I've been listening to y'all, and again, fascinating authors. I'm really into everything y'all are saying, and I really truly appreciate being here. For me, I'm going to tell you the truth. Like y'all sound like y'all are real writers. I am not a real writer.
Sure.
I'm going to tell you the truth about this.
We're just
But
good at bullshitting.
Nope, I don't believe you.
Okay. You're just
Nope.
wait till what I'm about to say. Okay. So how I got started into writing, and whenever I say I, it always means we, but how I got started in writing was I had a bad thing happen in my life. And like, you know, we all have had in our lives something bad. And I started reading J.R. Ward, and she had this gay character, and I had never read anything like that before. It was brand new. I wasn't even a paranormal reader, but I picked her up, and I fell in love with this gay character that she has. And then that gay character started dating another vampire. You know, so you have a vampire warrior on one hand, and then you have this attorney vampire in her world. And then she dared to do what she wanted with her characters. And it broke my heart because I wanted them to be together. So I've taken those characters out of her book, and I write mostly standalones or duets, but those two characters are in every book I write. And they're not vampires. I write contemporary, but those two characters are like, it's like playing Barbie dress up, you know, like they get to be a biker in this one, and they get to be a restaurant owner in this one, but they're the same men. And I feel like, and I would be interested what you guys think about this. I feel like I can get really deep character depth because I know those men so well. I mean, they live in my head every day for, I love you, Paige, for 10 years now. You know, I know everything about them. And I'm going to stop talking now because I can't believe I let that story out.
Well, they've become real. They've become real to you.
They are real.
They're not just characters. They're real to you. And I think, I think a lot of us will probably have characters like that have become real to us. We hear them. They talk,
They talk.
They have their personality.
Sometimes they won't shut up.
Yeah.
Right.
I write
Right.
characters that are smarter than me, they know stuff I don't know. And so I get it, how that works. But the fact that you've gotten to know these characters, you have a personal relationships with these characters,
Very much.
and you're telling their story. That absolutely makes you a writer. That's what we're all
100%.
doing.
Yeah.
That's what we're all
Yeah,
doing.
and
That's
Yes.
it, exactly. I remember I used to take my characters shoe shopping with me. I would sit down and have, imaginary conversations with them as we're going grocery shopping. Anything to develop them to the point where they were real enough in my head that I could sit down and write about their stories without any impunity whatsoever. What you're doing is it's a writer's trick. It's an author's, what's the word for it?
Cool.
That's exactly what it is. And as it stands, that makes you more of an author than somebody who will, sit down and pretend to not even put any heart or any thought into the story. If you don't like your characters, if you cannot relate to your characters, nobody else is going to as well. So don't put yourself down like that. Don't do that. Don't.
And that also works for your villains too.
Mhm.
You can love to hate your villains. You can still
Right.
have that relationship with characters you absolutely despise.
Wait,
But
you're
you-
supposed to hate your villains?
You're supposed to hate some of them,
Yeah.
or
Well,
when you're getting to know
It
your,
depends.
when you get to know your villains, that you also have to understand why they despise the hero. You're seeing it from all the
Yeah.
different angles and kind of getting into all of their heads.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I have to
And-
tell you something. Let me just throw this in real quick. The villain has always been that author that I love, J.R. Ward. I love her, but she's the villain to them because she tried to keep them apart. Okay, go ahead. I'm
This
sorry.
So
makes me
welcome
so
to Late
happy, I
Night
can't even tell
Confessions
you.
on ConTinual.
One of the things I think all of us as writers do or have is we know things about our characters that we will never write about, that the characters know it, but they'll never say it. My character Bianca Jones, I know where she went to school. I know what kind of school she went to. I know her teachers. I know part of stuff she learned in school is why she became what she is. One of my characters, his parents were circus folks, and he literally ran away from a circus. But it's never come out. One comment was the closest I ever came to is, "What are you doing with the crossbow?" "Oh, it was my mother's." And that's it. But I think we all do, and that helps us relate to the characters. And again, getting in with the theme, it's those little details that we alone know that help us build the characters of our characters.
I think it
I wanna
helps.
add to that. This is really important that for people listening to this, especially if you're new writers, I agree with what John said, but at least for me, and I think for a lot of writers, that depth of knowledge of your character happens over multiple books over time. I'm not one of those writers. There are writers who will sit down and go have pages and pages and pages of character history and development before they start writing. That's not me, and it doesn't have to be you. That comes.
And it's not me either.
Yeah, that'll
It's
build.
not me either.
I just wanted to make sure we didn't give the wrong idea that you have to do it, to that depth. That can come over time for some people.
Yeah,
Well,
you
I
don't
think
have
in
to
some
do it
ways
to
that's the
that depth.
way-
I'm a discovery writer, and I don't know when it's going on until I open the door into the next scene. You don't have to have all those details, but you do have to have a level of consistency. Quick example, I don't even remember the name of this book. It shall be forever known in my mind as the terrible book in all capital letters. I read one paragraph of this book. The first sentence of the first paragraph in the book, the character is shirtless, and by the end of the paragraph, he was wiping his mouth on his sleeve. I was done with the book at that point. Don't be that person. You don't have to have 80 pages of character Bibles, but for God's sakes, he either has the shirt on or not. That's all I'm going to say
Yeah,
about
the
that.
sleeve garters. You know, where you just have the bottom part of the sleeve.
I'm just going to say bad editing. Who edited it?
I know.
What editing?
And I was also going to say that a lot of people, I think, waste time instead of actually writing their story or their book and developing their world Bible. They need those pages of the character's background, and they need all the details of the world, what happened in 1292 and all that. And that, while it's nice to have, I don't know about everybody else, but I often have an outline when I write, and the outline and the finished book are not the same. So I can't imagine if I
100%.
took all that time to write a world Bible. And I recently did for a shared world, and changes happened. And I think that, just doing that can be a way to delay instead of while watching TikTok. You're doing that. It's more productive than watching something, but not as much. And also, just so you know, a very well-known series started out the same way you're talking about. And a lot of people know this, is that the 50 Shades of Grey books were originally fan fiction of Twilight.
And the
then
secretary.
Yeah,
And the movie, The Secretary.
Well, that's totally
I think
me.
it's amazing that they were able to do that. So you have a fine history to
go
look up to.
All
Right.
work
May you
is
sell as
derivative
many
in some
copies.
way.
Right. And she did exactly the same thing. I mean, well, she did it. And I do appreciate you bringing that up. And thank you guys for being so nice. That's all I have to say. You guys were so nice and trying to encourage me that I'm a writer. Thank you.
That's what we're here for.
I know you're really good.
And that's why you're here on a writing panel.
on a writing
It's because you're a writer. That's why we're saying you are.
I always feel like a poser when I do these kinds of things. Y'all are just really smart people.
Well, I think
Justice syndrome is a real thing.
Yeah, I was going to say at one point, I'm sure we've all felt that way at some point.
Mhm.
And I think doubt, I think doubt is a creative person's like constant companion.
Right.
Is this the one book that I've written? This will be I've written 100 books. 101 will be the one where they realize I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Oh, you're supposed to know what you're doing. I just, like all fiction writers, I make it up as I go along.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like Stuart said earlier. We're just good at bullshitting at this
You get paid to lie.
Yeah.
You just learn to lie better. So
and like a good con man, if you believe it, your audience will believe it.
And I do believe it. I believe in these gay vampire warriors. I believe in them. Woo-hoo.
and in the next book, there'll be
Then
hockey
they're real.
players.
Gonna be hockey players. Right.
So
Hockey
Stephanie,
is something I've stayed away from. Have y'all done hockey? Because hockey
No, but
fans,
I went to a hockey college, so where the pickup line was, "Hi, I'm a hockey player." So if you have questions, my information's 30 years old, but hockey.
Paige, you should be proud of me because you have no idea the line I wanted to make after that. I'll tell
Well, you can tell me after.
So Stephanie, I'm going to give you the last word before we wrap it up. So for your tidbits, what do you do for those details with your characters?
It depends. Some characters.
Have you been around Stuart?
Just a little bit. It rubs off. But for some things, the details have to be important. Unfortunately, in this country, white, male, and straight is the default. I'm a minority, and I do write minority characters. So that means I am going to have to write not only how my characters see the other people, but how the other people see my characters. And I'm a one that believes in details. to the point where I actually grabbed my editor and was like, feel my hair. She's never felt Black people's hair before, and she didn't know about shrinkage or anything, just so that she knew when I was writing, she could write it properly, the book that she was working on. So when you're dealing with something like that, that's going to be a detail that becomes part of the story, because unfortunately, that's the world that we live in. I love it when I mention it at the beginning, and then later on, people forget and just like, okay, this is just a wonderful story. But a lot of the reactions that my characters are going to have is going to be because we live in two different worlds. I mean, we live in this world right now. I can't tell you what it's like to be Black. I mean, to be white in this world. You don't know what it's like to be Black in this world. So we have to have a kind of a meeting in the minds in the middle. And for that, you do need some important details that cannot be dropped off or written wrong. If it's incorrect, I mean, horror story. I read a book about a slave owner who basically did a whole bunch of crap to his daughter, and his daughter ran off to a reservation and married the Indian chief, and had a baby that was blonde haired and blue eyed. And the mom was right out of Africa. So I was like, my Putnam squares that you made me learn in middle school, where are you? Didn't you do the same classes? So there are things like that. Just those details, if you get wrong, it's horribly wrong. Because that book went hurling across the room. I think I broke the spine on the book, and then I took it out back and burnt it in effigy. It was that bad. So there are certain circumstances where the details have to be there. They have to be important, and you have to remind the people of the details because of the actions that gathers around them in the world in the story. Other than that, I think I do take a page from everybody else's book, and I don't try to beat somebody over the head with what my characters look like, because that's not important. The important is the relationship that they have with the world, with the other people, and ultimately with the reader. So I don't want the reader to every 2 seconds go back and get flustered because blue eyes aren't mentioned when he describes the character a little bit later. But there is something important when you have to talk about that, 4C hair, that you might have to remind somebody out, because it'll come in later on as a plot detail that somebody will say, hey, you got that wrong. The same way dealing with different ethnicities and different cultures. You have to be very, very careful and mindful of the details that you use. You have to get them right, because then your book will go hurtling across the room, get the bind spoken, and then burnt in effigy. But other than that, I do my best not to be preachy and not to slap my characters, my readers around with things that they can get. I've read stories where people have written 3 or 4 paragraphs with just somebody walking across the room. And it's like, I really didn't need to know about the static electricity on that carpet. Those are details that aren't really necessary at all. But when it goes back to my character development, once again, it depends. If I'm dealing with minorities, if I'm dealing with different ethnicities, then those details are very important. They have to be sharp and clean. If I'm just dealing with the average everyday story that's not going to be too tight on details, or, too tight on making any point or doing visibility or anything, then okay, I can say that he has blue eyes at the beginning, he has long hair. They might be an accent that's really weird, or they might have a speech impediment, or like me, a handicapped. Those are the important details that I'll keep in, because that is what's important to the story. And if you bring it up and you put it in the book, that detail has to have some purpose. It just can't be like a wandering singularity that floats through your book, and like, if it becomes a series, 7 books later, somebody goes, but why was she holding on to that bloody hatchet in the bathroom? Those are type of things that I find as a reader myself to be more important and more engaging and more grabbing than some of the other small details that might be forgotten. So, I mean, you just have to be mindful of your audience, what you're doing, and who your audience is, and who your characters are as applies to those audiences. So, I mean, Kindle, you deal with a lot of gay cowboys. I'm not a gay man. When I do my gay characters, I will hunt down all my gay friends and beg them to read and have them check my details to make sure this is right. I have the Gay Kama Sutra. I have a bunch of different gay books to make sure that I'm getting all the details and stuff right, because those are things that I will never understand, because I'm not a gay man. So those are the details and things that are integral to the plot of the story integral to your character development, and integral to your reader, not hawking your books across the room in anger, that you have to keep in mind. So, I mean, I agree with everything that everybody said. I just wanted to add that little tidbit right in there, because that's a little golden nugget that I found that's very helpful for me in my writing.
Well, and I
I'm
think
really
tonight
glad you
has,
brought that up.
yeah, I think tonight has really gone through a lot of how do we really, what's important, what's not. And that's what I really wanted to hit tonight was, if the devil's in the details, what's, is it important that he signed it in blood, or is it important to read the contract? And I think we hit that really well tonight. But before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to come find these books and add them to their to be read pile. And because nobody left me with an adult supervision, we're going to go backwards. So Patrick, where can we find you? Website, social media, that to be read pile.
PatThomas.net for my grown-up fiction. I write books for kids as Patrick T. Phibbs at patricktfibbs.com. Patrick Thomas author at Facebook, I_Patrick Thomas at Twitter. I think that covers most of it.
Bobby?
BobbyNash.com is my website. You can see everything there. Ben-books.com is my indie press where I do most of my crime fiction. I'm on all the social medias, author Bobby Nash on Facebook, at Bobby Nash on Twitter, and Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram.
Stuart?
Yes, this is me a surprise. You can find me at stuartjaffe.com. When you're there, you can sign up for my newsletter. You'll get some free books. If you prefer paying for books, you can go on to Amazon. I've got audiobooks as well, all that kind of stuff. And I'm on Facebook. That's Stuart Jaffe. And I now have a Facebook group called Stuart Jaffe's Madhouse, and we're starting to have some fun there too. So,
John?
Hey, no website. You can, if you want to chat, you can find me at jfrenchfam at AOL.com. I have my Amazon page is John L. French. I'm on Facebook. You can follow me on BookBub. My upcoming books are, several of us here have a story in Zorro's Exploits, hopefully coming out sometime this month. I have a couple books coming up. The Last Monster, the final volume in the Bianca Jones series. And my most current book is Mortal Sins, stories about a forensic investigator who worked for the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office.
Paige?
Sorry, I'm distracted. My coonhound's having a kit fit as a dog. Anyway, yes, I am Paige L. Christie everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, PaigeLChristie.com. And you have to use the L because I have two first names, and otherwise things get weird. So that's where I'm at. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I'm most active on Facebook, or you can email me at PaigeLChristie@gmail.com. So I'm easy to find.
Stephanie?
I am really easy to find as well. You can find me at Office Stephanie Burke online. There are way too many Stephanie Burkes out there. And all my social media links and things are there. See, simple.
And Kindle?
First, I like that you learned really quickly to put me last. And then second, did anybody say the F word? I'm not sure that I heard it.
It did not get in. We could do it all together because that didn't seem to flow naturally into the conversation.
And
right?
I felt for you for that. I did.
I almost said, "Oh, puck," when we were talking about hockey, but someone started talking.
There you go.
That would be good.
So if everyone would like to say it together on the count of three. 1, 2, 3.
Fuck!
I just heard the no in there, so I didn't say it, but I want to say it. You did real good. That was really good. I like you. Okay. You can find me and you did good. You can find me at KindleAlexander.com, and we spell that like the Amazon Kindle, Kindle, Alexander.com. That was my daughter's name. And I have a thing called a no thank you bite. you don't really know if you like my genre until you give it a chance, and I will send you a free ebook to just give it a try and see if you like it. You can find my email, I think, on my website, but it's Kindle@KindleAlexander.com. And I have a book coming out in July, Level Up. And I think everyone in the world needs to read it. That's all I have to say.
There you go.
That's all I got.
And I have had the pleasure of trying to wrangle this crowd tonight. Jim Nettles, you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, speculativefictionacademy.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And we will see all of you guys again soon. Night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.